I'm Whitney.
I'm Mindy.
And I'm Deb.
We're three best friends who love nerdy things.
Well, some people think we're nerdy, but we think we're pretty awesome.
This is Our Nerdiest Thing.
Hello, fellow nerds, and welcome to Our Nerdiest Thing. Today, we are finishing our discussion on the Netflix series Midnight Mass. We are discussing episode 7, and we have author and vampire expert AJ Vrana. Oh, I said it wrong already.
No, you're fine. You're good. It's good. It's good. You rolled the R. It was good.
I did. Vrana.
I'm so turned on by you right now, Whitney.
Oh, thank you so much. It is a talent sometimes to roll those R's. Vampire expert AJ Vrana.
Oh.
This episode is definitely spoiler heavy and spoiler friendly, so listen at your own risk. Before we get into it, Deb, will you please share our nerdiest cocktail?
Tonight's cocktail is called Crockett Island Sunrise, and it's themed after the most depressing and relieving morning ever. And this drink pairs well with being a coward at the last second, realizing you were very wrong, and burning down your whole town. And just a heads up, it might cause you to explode and turn into ash and dust. And this is our take on a tequila sunrise. So tequila, triple sec, orange juice, grenadine, splash of lime, and goes perfectly with the sunrise that we see at the end of this episode.
Nice. What a delight. I would love to explode into ash. Just make sure we pick a classic hymn to sing right before it happens.
Oh, right. I know. So I actually talk about that later in the episode. I really loved how the music stops and we just see everyone dying.
Mm-hmm.
It's really kind of cool.
Yeah.
Very macabre.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. I loved it. So, Mindy, have you spun the wheel of names for our nerdy and dirty recap?
Yes, we'd love to hear from Deb this week.
Deborah.
Shit, I thought it might be me. I'm like, and so much happens in this episode. I don't really know.
I know, right? Well, it's like it's one episode, but it's probably harder to do it for this one than it was for the 3 episodes last week.
The other ones.
And you know
Yes.
what? This is like the first time I've ever recorded not with Whitney in the room, so I don't have anyone that's going to give me like the 5-second countdown. So I hope I don't fuck this up.
So, AJ, Deb has 1 minute to give us 10 basically summary points of what happened in this episode of Midnight Mass. So I've got 1 minute on the clock, Deb. Ready, set, and go.
Okay, number 1, vampires are pulling all of the non-believers out of their homes and feeding on them. Number 2, Bev and Sturge attack Aaron's home and Annie slits her throat as a distraction. Number 3, we find out that Father Paul's motivation behind returning with the quote-unquote angel was to ensure that Mildred would not die because holy crap, he's in love with her and he's Sarah's father. Number 4, Bev wants to burn down the whole city and compares it to the Great Flood in the Bible with the rec center being Noah's Ark. Number 5, Annie and Ed, Riley's parents, reunite and decide they don't want to feed on other people. Number 6, Lisa pours gasoline on the angel and he's so engrossed in feeding he doesn't even notice that she lights his ass on fire. But that's not the only thing on fire. Aaron and Sarah burn all the boats so the vampires can't escape the island. Number 7, surprise, surprise, Bev becomes the actual villain and she truly believes that anyone who died deserves it for not coming to church. Oh, and she refuses to feed on the sheriff because he has quote unquote dirty blood. What a fucking bitch. Number 8, that's cool because Ali lights the rec center on fire. Number 9, Aaron is attacked by the angel and slices through his wings while he feeds. He flees to avoid the sun, but are his wings strong enough to get him to safety? I don't know. Okay, sorry. We have to say number 10 because it's very important. Bev fucking burns to death. Thank fucking God. Lisa can't feel her legs. And
Best recap ever.
I hate Bev. I hate her.
We all hate Bev.
You're supposed to hate her, right? Like,
I know. I've never wanted to like throat punch someone though. Like I don't want her to just die. I want to like punch her in like her ovaries and then watch her kill over and burn to death.
she is infuriating.
Right.
You did a good job, Deb. Before we get into starting off with our favorite moments in the last episode here, Mindy, will you please do our nerdiest vocabulary?
I would love to. And this week I decided because the inhabitants of Crockett Island use the word angel instead of vampire, I thought it'd be interesting to find some other creative names that you could use when talking about vampires instead of using the word vampire. Mm-hmm. So there is one that's sort of basic, but it's a hemivore because hema means blood and vor means to devour or eat. Shout out to my son Dawson for looking that up in his Greek word clues.
Thank you, Dawson.
Dawson.
So you can call a vampire a hemivore. another word that this is my favorite. It's a sanguisuge.
Oh.
So it's from the Latin sanguis, meaning blood, and sugere, meaning to suck. And it means appropriately bloodsucker. And even better, you can say
someone is sanguisugent, and that means they're bloodthirsty.
Ooh, I like that.
That's
I know.
very fancy.
I know. I'm really excited about this. I'm definitely going to put it into everyday conversation. So finally,
I'm sanguisugent about Bev's death.
Definitely. So, and the final one I found, it's just because it's fun to say, is chupacabra. And it's actually not really a true human vampire, but they do drink the blood of other animals. So this comes from the Spanish chupa, meaning sucks, and cabras, meaning goats. So it literally means goat sucker.
That's an insult. You goat sucker.
You goat sucker.
Well, and chupacabras are like dog-like, so they're not humanoid. They're very animal-like.
And AJ, do you know if they have like human intellect, or do they have just animal instinct, the chupacabra?
As far as I know, they're more animal than human. And I mostly know this actually. The whole reason I'm a vampire expert is because I did like a folklore exhibit at the Royal Ontario Museum, and they had a section on the chupacabra, which I wasn't responsible for that section, but I did read it. And so it is like a specific Latin American lore about like a kind of dog-like zombie creature that like comes in and eats like livestock or sucks the blood of like cows and stuff. So it's mostly like a rural folk tale.
Interesting. Do you know if they eat humans?
I don't think they do. No, I think it's mostly livestock.
Yeah, in my research, it was just drinking the blood of, and it said other animals, so I knew it wasn't like a human creature. But I just thought it was fun to say.
It is.
It is.
Chupacabra. I do think I'm going to start calling people goat suckers, though.
For sure.
Not chupacabras, but goat
sucker.
Well, let's get into this final episode of such a wonderful miniseries. I love this show so much. Let's talk about our favorite moment. Deb, you want to get us started with that?
Sure, of course. Obviously, watching Bev burn to death was the best thing I've witnessed so far this year, and in like all aspects of my life. But beyond that, the ending of this show was really quite beautiful. I brought this up just a few minutes ago, but all hope is literally lost for the vampire population, and the hymn that's playing in the background literally just stops when everyone burns to death, and it's beautiful filmmaking. And having the ash fall on Lisa and Warren whenever they're in the boat was a really impactful touch. So I think that was my favorite part of maybe the entire series, is their use of music and using it as a twist, and how eerie they've made all of these worship hymns seen in this world of like human desperation.
Yeah, and that hymn that they were singing is the same one that we talked about last week, where I was saying it's the Nearer God to Thee, about dying, and how it allegedly is the last song that the band played on the Titanic as it was sinking.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Oh yeah, I don't think any of these people are going to heaven.
Well, at least some of them think that they are.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, Father Paul repented. Maybe he'll go, and maybe the doctor's mom, Mildred, maybe she'll go. But I think everyone else is kind of fucked.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questionable morals there, to say the least.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, mine was the sheriff quoting scripture back to Bev at the end.
I almost put that too.
I can't remember if it was on the beach or while they were burning the rec center, but I think it was when they were burning the rec center. And, Bev, the entire show, has been using scripture as basically a weapon to other people, and to manipulate, to shame, to coerce. She has been misusing scriptures like completely out of context to make things go the way that she wants them to go. And so to see any of the other characters, but especially the sheriff, do that exact same thing to her because of all the animosity that she had toward him for no reason, just because she was being a racist, right? I really loved that moment. And he quoted a scripture that says the sun rises over, God makes the sun rise over the evil and the good.
Right. I wrote that down, and I loved that it was not only symbolic of what they were doing. It also has some foreshadowing in there, but also like fuck you. I know scripture too, and I can use it against you just like you've been using it against everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love regardless, Bev obviously thinks that she is good, right? And the sheriff, using that verse is like, it doesn't matter if you think you're good or not, right? Like your fate is the same. When the sun comes up, you're toast. Literally. I didn't even mean to do that.
Good job.
Thank you. Mindy, what about you? What was your favorite moment?
I think for me, it was when Erin starts cutting the angel's wings with the knife that she had, because she knew she was a goner, right? But she's so brilliant, because she knew in that moment that if she didn't do something to keep this thing from getting off the island, it was all of their sacrifice was going to be for nothing.
Yeah.
And I just she's definitely like the smartest one on that island, right? But she just is brilliant to have that forethought in that moment. I love her.
Well, I loved that scene too. It was kind of in a heartbreaking way, because the reason that she's able to cut through his wings is because she pulls his head back to sucking her blood more. She distracts him with what she knows he wants. And, she's already said previously in the series that her ex-husband, I guess, was abusive toward her. Mm-hmm. And I just felt like that was such not a trope, that's not the right word, but that made a lot of sense to me for a woman who has been dealing with domestic violence to know, like, if I can distract you with my body, I might be able to protect other people, right? Like, it's the kind of thing maybe a mom might do for her children to protect her children from an abusive spouse.
Correct.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like a different kind of sacrifice.
I wanted to ask you, AJ, that whole idea, we see this, we keep calling it the angel, but the vampire. We've seen a couple of times now the vampire get so distracted by drinking blood that, like Deb was saying in the recap, he gets lit on fire. Like, there's two human people in this house with this creature,
and she shoots him like 3 times with a rifle,
and he's just like just waving him off.
What's he like? I didn't catch
that. Where does that fall into like vampire lore? Because I don't think I've seen a vampire portrayed like that outside of this show, where they can get so consumed by their bloodlust that they're like, they wouldn't notice other humans that they could feed off of. That just seems weird to me.
So what's really fascinating is that drinking blood is actually in and of itself not inherent to vampire lore. It's drinking life force. So blood is a development that happened over time. It wasn't necessarily like the original lore. And so oftentimes, like, vampires were people who kind of rose from the grave, and they would, and there were different reports. So there were some reports that they would like come into their old homes and like have sex with their wife, or like, suck someone's, like life force out. And sometimes that would be blood. Sometimes it would just be this like metaphysical energy, if you will. But I think the point is that they're sort of like creatures of appetite. And I do think that's something that you definitely see in like contemporary media. They're these, creatures of just appetite and like wanting and stuff. And so, but in like the original lore, it was deeply linked to like sinfulness, because there is a lot of Christian undertone. So I think that like this really just takes that and gives it a much more concrete form, because what is a better like depiction of just pure appetite than feeding, even when your life is at risk?
AJ, do you mind me asking then, would you say that an incubus and a succubus are actually a type of vampire, since they feed on like someone's like life force through pleasure? Would that be a type of vampire?
I mean, I think it's vampiric, but I think if you're talking strictly about the vampire as a creature, like a specific creature in folklore, then no, because they have different origins. Like, so they're like a vampiric creature, but like even the word like vampire is like a specific term that has a specific etymology, and it can be traced back to like Southeastern Europe. In that instance, like there was no notion of like succubus or incubus. It was just a very localized folklore. And it actually had a lot to do with European colonizers kind of coming into parts of Southeastern Europe and trying to colonize. And so like a lot of that folklore was actually linked to colonization, which had nothing to do with like the incubus and succubus.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I'm like learning so much from you, and we've been on air for like 5 minutes.
I know, right? It's like you've blown my mind already,
so
AJ.
Intriguing.
That the folklore for vampirism has not always been about blood. I'm just like, oh, what?
Yeah, actually, like most of the stuff that we have now that we kind of trace back to Bram Stoker has like almost no connection to original vampire lore. Like he kind of just made a lot of stuff up that had like, no basis. But that's sort of what became the canon for like contemporary Western understandings of vampires.
Wow.
Probably because it was just so widely distributed. Too.
Right. It's hard to believe that someone believed a middle-aged man when he said something to you. That's crazy.
But yeah, like, it's fascinating. Like I could go on forever, honestly.
Well, that's why you're here.
Well, and Whitney, I will say too, like I think for my least favorite moment, it has to do with the blood, right? So my least favorite moment,
I wonder if it's the same one.
Yeah, it was when Bev says the sheriff has dirty blood. I hated that.
Oh yeah.
I don't really need to elaborate more on this and why that's not okay. And it feeds into the religious fanaticism in this series and the racism that we've discussed in the last 2 episodes for this show. Yeah. But it like made me queasy. I forget that people still say shit like that. And I'm glad that I don't associate with people that say shit like that, but it sucks that it still happens.
Well, and it happens on the heels of her praising the sheriff's son.
Yeah.
For, we talked about that in last episode when the son is like, I choose God. And you're like, no. Right. And she praises him and is like, good for you, making this choice. And it's the same DNA. Right.
Yeah. Okay, because later when we talk about our favorite secondary character, Ollie is mine because
mine too.
Her. Yeah. Okay. Well, I can't wait to get there.
Yeah, well, my least favorite moment was about blood also, when Dr. Sarah gets shot by Sturge, who thinks that he's protecting Father Pruitt. The priest has already realized, like, I really effed this up. It's way too late, right? Even though he knows that he has made these horrible, wrong choices, that need that he has to try to save the people that he loves has him compelled to still try to feed Sarah his blood to save her from dying. Mm-hmm. And she spits it back out, which kind of goes against that human instinct to survive, right? That's a lifeline to not have to die and suffer the pain that she was feeling. Well, I guess she would have suffered the pain anyway, but spitting it back out, just the fact that he did it at all really was just like, dude, you just learned that you made a really horrible decision and you're like the next opportunity that you have, you're going right back to it. And that was frustrating.
You find out that she's his kid. And I think there's something about protecting your own child.
Well, sure. Yeah, sure.
AJ, were you going to say something? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I think it's also really fascinating because it's a great example of someone like robbing someone else of their free will or trying to anyway, under the pretense of like what you think is best or like for your own selfish reasons.
Yeah.
And so like, even though he thinks he's saving her, like I think probably if we had access to her thoughts, she would be like, no, you're robbing me of my choice to die with dignity or to die as a human or whatever it might be. And especially because there's that parent-child relationship. And like, I definitely link that to the way that like sometimes parents think they're sacrificing everything for their child. But from the child's perspective, it's like, no, actually, you're just like trampling on what I want.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and he does that. The priest does that to the whole church, right? Because he's secretly feeding them vampire blood in the communion.
Yeah, and that's them of their free will.
Right. None of them get to choose that. They're unknowingly being fed something that has these consequences that turns them into something different, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What
Also,
about you, Mindy? Oh, I'm sorry, AJ, go ahead.
I just like, sorry. There was just when you were talking about Ali and Bev's really like awful comment about dirty blood and like praising Ali, I thought that was actually a really fascinating moment because I think that really mirrors how racism works in the real world. Because what we see is like, you know, white people particularly who are critical of or like racist against, you know, other minorities, they will praise people from those minorities who align with them. So it's almost like this like selective inclusion to then be like, see, I'm not racist. Like those people just need to understand like my point of view and then everything will be fine. And so it's so insidious because it kind of like obscures just how racist they are because they sort of are like, oh, but you made the right choice. So you're welcome in my group.
Yeah.
It's always conditional.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah, that is a really good point. Mindy, what was your least favorite moment?
I don't feel like mine's as deep.
That's okay.
Well, first of all, I really, really just wanted to say that my least favorite moment is every time Bev opened her mouth. But I got a little more specific. For me, and I promise not every one of mine is about Erin, I just felt like attached to her. And when the vampire first starts attacking her and starting to kill her, and she's screaming that scream that's like gut wrenching. And I just started thinking that poor woman has already been through so much trauma. You know, she had an abusive husband. She was going to have a baby by herself, and then the baby just disappears. You know, she had to watch Riley disintegrate and just all of that. And she still has this hope for humanity. And then to hear that scream, and I don't know, it really affected me.
Yeah.
That's
Erin had it rough.
Yeah, she really did. And that's interesting, Mindy, because that is my favorite scary scene.
Oh, funny.
And the reason why, and I mean, I want to point out that the whole episode's terrifying because you're watching the town all turn on each other, right? In shows and films like this that show what humans do to one another in dire situations is way more frightening than any supernatural creature we could ever imagine. But whenever the vampire is feeding on Erin and you hear all of those blood squelching sounds and you see the skin pulling as she cuts through his wings, it actually transforms into this beautiful callback to Erin's conversation with Riley where they discuss what happens when someone dies. And not to move too far ahead, it just so happens that what you said goes with my favorite scary scene and my favorite quote. Because when Erin's dying, she has this like monologue that's really beautiful. And there was just a part of it that I loved that says, I remember that every atom in my body was forged in a star. This matter, this body, is mostly just empty space after all. And solid matter, it's just energy vibrating very slowly, and there is no me. There never was. The electrons within my body mingle and dance with the electrons of the ground below me and the air I'm no longer breathing, just by remembering I'm returning home. And I started fucking bawling. I mean, it was such a touching moment. And so, I mean, it again, I would say it turned into one of my least favorite moments into one of my favorite scary scenes because like she's getting hers, but it's like graphic in the sounds. I think that's what I liked about it. But then really turns into this beautiful, beautiful moment. Like you said, she makes a lot of sacrifices.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about our favorite scary scene because that one was actually mine too, Deb. And then we can go back and talk about our biggest revelation. But yeah, I loved that scene as a scary scene too, Erin getting attacked by the angel. But for me, it was more what I was talking about earlier. She's trying to distract the angel with her blood so that she can cut the wings. And for me, that was a lot of tension of, is that distraction going to work? Is he going to realize what she's doing? Is he going to torture her and hurt her even worse than he's already doing? If he realizes what she's trying to do, is she going to succeed or not succeed? Because like you said, Mindy, like if they don't keep that creature on the island from being able to fly, to the mainland, everything they've done is for nothing.
You're right.
Right. That was a lot of tension for me. So it wasn't scary in that traditional scary way, but it freaked me out. Right. Because I wanted her to not die, but I also wanted her to succeed with what she was trying to do. So I thought that was a really well done scene with that type of tension.
What's interesting is my favorite scary scene is also something that I think Deb brought up as her favorite scene. And it's not even really scary, but for me, it was so eerie that it left this sort of weird visceral reaction with me. And it's when everyone is singing Nearer My God to Thee, and then the camera is panning out and all you see is the overhead of the island burning, and then the sun comes up, and then that singing just cuts off.
Yeah.
And like, it's not scary, but it's definitely a very eerie, like all of a sudden everything's silent.
It's just unsettling.
Yes, unsettling. That's the perfect word for it.
I think you're supposed to feel relief, and you don't.
And you don't.
Right.
I know.
Right. Yeah, that's a tough moment.
Yeah.
That's a real tough
I mean, this
moment.
whole episode was a little
It
tough.
is, yeah. Mindy, what was your biggest revelation?
Well, mine's pretty obvious. It's that Sarah is Monsignor's daughter with Mildred. And honestly, I'd watched this before and I'd totally forgotten about that. I don't know. I remembered that that Mildred and he were together, but I totally forgot that Sarah was his daughter. And that moment when he admits that he never felt like Sarah was a mistake was so poignant too, especially when you consider that Sarah was a lesbian and never accepted by the church.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
And Mindy, mine piggybacks on that, because that was also my biggest revelation. But with that was that Father Paul did everything that he did because he didn't want Mildred to be sick anymore. So, he fell in love with this woman. They had an affair while her husband was at war. They had a baby that he's, had to love from afar for 40 years. And you find he's watching Mildred slowly decline and, losing herself. And he admits that really he did everything because he wanted to help her.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, and he acts like it's for the greater good and for the whole congregation, but it's really just about this one person that he loves. Right. And by extension, his daughter, who he also loves. Yeah. My biggest revelation is a little bit different. And AJ, I would love to hear your thoughts about this. My biggest revelation was getting to the end of this last episode and not ever hearing anybody say the word vampire one time in the whole series, which I know that part of the story is that the priest thinks that this is an angel, which is just, we talked about, like, that's just stupid, right? Like we've got some real stereotypical vampire stuff going on, right? But it is so interesting to me to make it so clear and obvious that we're talking about a vampire with the story and what's actually happening, but to have not one single character actually voice that is so interesting to me. And AJ, as our vampire expert, tell me why. Why did they do this?
I think there's a few reasons, and these are just theories, of course. I don't know for sure, but one reason, I think, just logistically, like, the vampire is a very culturally loaded term. And so I think as soon as you start talking about vampires, you're creating expectations in the audience. And I think with a show like this, you want to minimize expectation because you want people to really absorb the show, with the authors or with the creators' intentions in mind. As soon as you start throwing around words like vampire, like, there's going to be other associations that people start making, and that might actually stop them from appreciating the show for what it is. So I think that's one really big logistical reason. I think the other reason is that Father Paul's, like, clearly deluded thinking that this thing is an angel is really important, because it is such a good metaphor for, like, human hubris. And he is full of hubris. Like, he really believes the thing is an angel, but he's kind of delusional. And not only is he delusional about that, he's also delusional about his own motivations. Because, like, as you guys pointed out, he's doing all of this for one person, but he's kind of constantly presenting it as he's doing it for the community. And so he's lying to himself. And so I think by keeping the word vampire out of it, it really becomes, I guess, symbolic of the way that people lie to themselves, and they dance around the thing that's obvious to create this narrative that serves them.
That's a really good point.
Oh, definitely.
It's like not naming it, even though it's so obvious, because it's too difficult to deal with the reality of it all. That's really interesting. See, that's why you're here, AJ.
And also because you're just an
expert.
awesome human.
Yeah. So we talked about our favorite scary scenes already. So let's talk about our episode or series MVP. Deb, you want to start us off with that one?
Sure. My MVPs, for not really for the whole series, but mostly here at the end, have to be Annie and Ed, who are Riley's parents.
Yeah.
Not only does Annie sacrifice herself to save Aaron and Sarah, but then she and Ed reunite and they decide that they don't have to participate in the murder of non-believers, and they actually choose not to feed.
Yeah.
They happily embrace each other as the sun rises while singing and rally a part of the community together to help accept their fate. And, they would rather die than participate in the pain or murder of others, just like Riley did. And so it was really awesome to see that parallel and see his parents come together and forge ahead just like they taught him to, and to always end up doing the right thing, even though they were misled along the way. And I just thought that was really, really beautiful. I really hated Ed at the beginning of the series and ended up really adoring him by the end.
Yeah, I like Ed a lot too. My MVPs are for this episode, but also for the whole series, Aaron and Dr. Sarah. I mean, especially these last couple of episodes, along with the sheriff, of course, they really keep the story moving toward that hopeful space, right? Because it's dark. There's a lot of dark, heavy stuff going on in this show. And especially this last episode, you're watching all these people who would consider themselves to be good people, moral Christian people. They're just murdering and brutalizing for nothing but their own, selfish appetite, right? And Sarah and Aaron and the sheriff are the ones that keep it in this space of it might be okay at the end, right? Like, it's not going to be a happy ending, but it could at least be a hopeful ending that they're not going to make it to the mainland and do this to everybody in the world, everybody on the mainland. They keep it hopeful for me. Yeah. They're my MVPs. Mandy, what about you?
Mine's more for this episode, and it's Lisa, because of all the things she has to go through. And again, she's another one of those smart people on the island that thinks ahead and is a planner. So she has to first resign herself that she has to leave her parents, and she really never questions it. Like, she asks, she says something about it in the beginning and they're like, no, they're gone. And she's like, okay, well, let's get shit done now. So they're hiding inside Joe's trailer, and she knows she needs to take that rifle, even if it just buys them minutes. And that's so symbolic, because even though that wasn't the one that caused her injury, it was talked about with Joe. So that was, for me, seemed like sort of a healing moment for her.
Yeah.
She also has the foresight to grab a can of gas just in case they need it for the boat. But that preparation is what saved them when they stumble upon Bull and the vampire in the abandoned house. So she knows to make a trail outside, not to just blow it up, because they're going to blow up with it. So she does that, very calculated. And then as they're trying to leave, she has to reassure Warren, who somehow still is questioning whether his parents and everyone are actually going to die. Like, come on, bro. She has to be that person for him to be like, okay, she still has this faith. She's like Wonder Woman for me in this last little bit.
I feel so bad for her too, Mindy, because her parents just go fucking nuts.
They really do.
I know.
She does not have anyone in the end except for Warren.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I I do understand the thought process of her parents, right? Because their whole, I guess I want to say, conversion over to the Father Paul way of thinking is because they see their daughter be healed.
Right.
Right. And, we talked about this in last episode, or maybe the one before, when her dad says, I'm not going to interrogate a miracle. It just doesn't feel right. Like, this happened to her and that's wonderful. And I'm going to take it and I'm going to run with it. Right. And I totally understand as a parent, if something amazing like that happened to my kid, I would want to be all about it too. And I would love to think that I would have the morality to be like, oh, you want me to eat people? No, thanks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, she really had it. She had it rough.
Yeah.
Really, really rough. AJ, do you have any favorite character?
I think there were a lot of great characters. I mean, everyone was very complex. And so I think that really speaks to the success of the writers. I do really like, oh my God, is it Liza?
Lisa, yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. Yes, Lisa. I do really like her actually for a lot of the reasons that were already stated. And like, obviously, her entire circumstances are really just incredible, both in like a horrifying way, but also the fact that she's one of the only survivors, like, really pleased me. I was like, please don't kill her. Please don't kill her. I was really happy that she survived. But I think that, like, especially as a disabled teenager who really doesn't have any power in her community, like, I think that she just handled herself so well.
Yeah, I agree.
And I actually found her to be the sort of bastion of hope almost, for me anyway, in the show. I live with a chronic illness, and so, like, I was able to really relate to her on that level of, like, hey, like, you have this thing that you can't change about yourself, and this miracle happens, and all of a sudden, like, the way that people view you and the way that, like, they're now understanding their entire, I guess, environment because of that miracle. I think that can be very alienating. And I think we see some of that alienation with her, and just the way that she handles herself and kind of survives and plans and thinks ahead is just so impressive to me. So I was like, damn, I would not have been able to do that at her age. So.
Oh, yeah,
she's definitely more mature than most of the adults on this show.
100%.
She's more mature than me. Like, in life in general, I feel like. No,
AJ, I'm sorry, Whitney, do you mind if I ask the
please go
vampire
ahead.
expert a question real quick? Okay, so one of the questions that I really need resolved is, like, I'm not convinced that the angel died. We never saw him die.
I was just about to talk about this, Deb.
We knew he flew to avoid the sun. It never shows him dying. I'm not really holding on hope that he did. We don't know how fast he could heal his wings, right? Now, having said that, at the very end, Lisa's last line is, I can't feel my legs. And so are we supposed to assume, much like almost like werewolf lore, where if you kill the alpha person of the werewolf pack, then everyone that's been turned is no longer a werewolf? Are we supposed to assume that the angel died, and so, like, she kind of lost that healing power? Like, what are we supposed to make of that?
So the way I interpreted her losing her feeling in her legs again was just that the blood was through her system.
Okay.
Like, I just, I mean, I could be completely wrong, but the way I interpreted it was just that the blood was through her system, and so she was back to sort of like having, you know, her normal biological functioning, if you will. As for the vampire / angel, I mean, like, I do feel like it's a very classic horror ending to sort of have that ambiguity about whether or not the vampire survived. I could see it surviving. It's a very hardy beast, if you will. Like, it's just a really a monstrous creature. I mean, you guys have talked about that scene where you know, its wing gets cut off, and like, and it's just, it doesn't care. So I kind of wouldn't be surprised if it survived, but I didn't link that to Lisa losing feeling in her legs.
The blood makes sense because she hasn't been ingesting it. So yeah, that does make some sense. And I will say the same thing. You called him a beast, which I really liked, but I'm thinking as he's flying across this ocean, right? Because they're on an island, he does have immortality essentially, right? With the exception of the sun. And my thought was, well, shit, he could have just went in the water and went deep enough where the sun couldn't penetrate him. There's so many things about that. And
I never thought about that.
It does make it more chilling at the end that you don't see him die. I actually really like that ending.
Yeah.
Is that part of vampire lore, AJ, that they could, like, stay underwater? Because I know that Victoria does in Twilight.
No, the original vampire lore, you have to you got to chop the head off, and you have to burn the vampire, but you can also stake the vampire, but it has to be with a hawthorn stake, so it can't just be any old stake. So there's a very specific tree that you have to use, also like hawthorn berries and like the tea from the berries, like those are all vampire repellents in the traditional lore. But yeah, it's and actually one piece of lore that is really fascinating that is not known by anyone is when you kill a vampire, when you chop its head off, a butterfly emerges from its mouth. And that and that is the vampire's soul. And you have to kill the butterfly, because if you don't, it's going to run around killing children.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
That is so cool. Now, you said that a lot of people don't know this. Are there any books or really any cinema that you can think of that's ever portrayed that? Because that's super cool.
Not in English.
Okay. Because I mean, a butterfly to me is like a symbol of hope.
Yeah, no. And actually there is a scientific reason for this specific folklore around butterflies. So there is a chemical that corpses release that actually attracts butterflies. And that same chemical is found in hawthorn. And so what I assume happened was people would see butterflies congregating both around corpses and this specific type of wood. And so they started to associate that with vampires, who always, are essentially corpses risen from the dead. So I think that's how that happened.
AJ, you blow my mind.
I know.
I mean,
Whitney and I are looking at each other with our mouths open and our eyes wide.
I am I would consider myself a vampire nerd. I'm not a vampire expert by any means, but I'm like, you're telling me all this stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like I don't know anything about vampires.
I know, right? That's
blown
crazy.
away.
So AJ, is the whole, the vampires can't be in sunlight. How far back does that go? Is that, origin vampire lore, or is that like Bram Stoker?
So there is some evidence of light sensitivity. And that's because there is a type of illness caused by a vitamin deficiency that actually makes you sensitive to light, and it also makes you very sensitive to garlic.
Yeah, we talked about this actually in the last season.
So that's the only thing I can think of. But the whole bursting into flames is not really original lore. I assume that's like Bram Stoker onward.
Going backwards in our conversation a little bit back to Lisa, I took her comment at the end there that she could feel her legs very much like Deb. You were kind of posing your question that the vampire didn't make it. The vampire died in the sunlight. And because the vampire died, it's like blood, power, whatever was not in her body anymore. That's definitely how I interpret that.
That's also how I interpreted it. And I think only because of the timing of it.
That's what I was just thinking. Like, if the blood just kind of worked through her system, that's pretty coincidental timing, right?
That's true.
And I mean, and it would have been pretty quick because she did consume blood that day, didn't she?
Probably.
Didn't she consume blood in the church?
Did they? Yeah.
Don't remember if they actually did communion or if they just did the Jonestown thing.
Yeah. Oh, I don't remember.
That may have been their
yes,
honestly, that might have been their communion. It may have been the day before.
Had it for a couple days, yeah, and it, she peed out all her blood power.
Don't you feel like she would have weakened though before? Like, it wouldn't just be that instantaneous,
right? That's true.
I don't know.
Well, that's a good point. I hadn't even thought about that.
We can get the creator of the show on.
Let's do that.
Mike Flanagan, will you call us and let us know?
I mean, shit, I'll send him an Instagram message. This far.
Yeah, that's true. Well, let's talk about our favorite secondary characters. Deb and I both already said Ali.
I want to hear why for you, Whit, and then I can talk about why I liked him so much.
I picked him because basically of his role in taking down the whole system, right?
Yeah, me too.
Ultimately, he is the reason that the rec center burned down. And he had made some poor choices and realized, just like the Father Pruitt, right? Like, I've really messed this up and it's really too late for me to fix it for myself, but I'm going to do what I can to help other people, right? And help the people on the mainland. And that, him burning down the rec center and him going with his dad and doing the prayers while his, he's getting ready to die in the sun while his dad is bleeding to death. Like, that was just so heart-wrenching.
That, Whitney, I was so relieved when the sheriff died before Ali burned in the sun, because there's nothing worse than the idea of watching your child die.
I know.
I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, thank God he died first.
I know. It's horrible.
Yeah. And that was,
It's
I mean,
just
everything that
horrible.
you just said is why I loved Ollie too. I mean, he was the catalyst for ensuring that they did not have shelter.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, yes, you did it.
Way to go,
all,
buddy.
all this series
Woohoo.
I've been saying, no, Ali, no. Yeah, so it was nice to be like, yay. What about you, Mindy?
So I went a different route. My favorite secondary character was Annie because of her bravery. Like when she goes out to stall Bev and Sturge and basically just tells Bev off and knocks her down a peg. I was like, you go, girl.
She's like, Bev, you are not
a good person.
Good person.
Yes.
Yeah. And I was like, thank God, finally someone said it.
I know. And her whole speech to her was just everything that everyone has always wanted to say to Bev. And then for her to sacrifice herself by slitting her throat to trigger them, to trigger their bloodlust, that just stalls them longer and helps the others to carry out what needs to be done. She's just a badass in that moment.
Yeah.
And it actually kind of leads into my favorite quote also. It's when she's talking about Riley to Bev, and then Bev takes that cheap shot at her, calling Riley a murderer. And she said, God loves him just as much as he loves you, Bev. Why does that upset you so much?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's such a good line.
Yeah. I'm like, thank you. Because why? Like, what? God, she's such a bitch.
Yeah. No, I mean, she is.
I'm just glad she got called out like that.
That whole scene with Annie reminded me of when we were reading A Soul of Ash and Blood, and Hawk talks about watching the soldier cut his own throat before he gets bit by a craven, and he slits his own throat before he can really like succumb to the curse or whatever. And that reminded me, the scene with Annie reminded me of that a lot. And Hawk's inner monologue of like, oh my gosh, the strength and the strength of character that would take to do that to yourself is kind of unbelievable. I also really loved Annie. She's telling Bev off, but she's still doing it in like a nice way.
I know.
She's like, well, damn you, Bev, you're Bev.
Like Bev, you're just a poo-poo head. She's giving it to her really,
she's
sticking it
her
to
off
her,
like you would, Wit. You'd be like, you know what? I hope you have the day you deserve. Well, I know, Mindy. I know what your favorite quote is now, and Whitney already said mine. So, what was yours, Wit?
Mine was actually from Ed Flynn. When he and Annie meet back up. One of you guys talked about it earlier, and they are talking about, Annie is saying, I feel the hunger, and is this what we're going to turn into? And she's like, have you done this to other people? And he's like, absolutely not. Of course I haven't done this. And he says, ultimately, whatever this is, it doesn't change who you are. It's not going to turn us into a mindless creature, right? Like,
right.
We are still us, and we are still able to think about this and make this choice for ourselves.
Well, and
I loved that
for the viewer too, because you are led to believe as the viewer that they can't control themselves. And
100%.
All of a sudden, Ed and Annie are like, wait, we don't have to do this. And it was an amazing turn.
Especially with Ed, because he turns way sooner than she does in the night, right? Like he still turns inside the church, and he is the character that we see, we see him and Annie, and we also saw Riley all turn into vampires and not ever feed on anybody, right? And Ed is the one who turned and fought that temptation for the longest. So he's really the first opportunity for us as the audience, like you're saying, Deb, to be like, oh no, you're not just a victim to this curse, right? Like it doesn't make you into a rabid beast. You still have choice in the matter. And it's rough to think about all these other people that have chosen to just like give themselves over to it.
Right.
That's rough. AJ, is there anything in vampire lore to suggest that vampires are able to fight off the appetite?
Definitely not.
So I guess, could Ed and Annie have made it long term? Like, you know what I mean? Could they have fed on animal blood, or like in traditional vampire lore, would they have eventually had to have like succumb to the lust?
No. I mean, in traditional lore, vampires are like literally corpses. they don't even look human. So they're like bloated and like red-faced and gross. So there's almost
yummy.
a little bit of like a zombie like feeling to them. So I don't think so.
So traditional original vampires would be more like the Walking Dead zombies.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
And like there's one account that was actually taken by a German army physician who was investigating vampires in like Serbia in the 18th century. And like he basically wrote down about a baby that was born like extremely deformed, and the woman claimed that her dead husband had arisen as a vampire and like raped her at night, and that the child was the result of this union, this unholy union.
Wow.
So there's like weird stuff like that, but there's no indication that vampires had like volition or free will.
I'm going to go ahead and hold on to hope that vampires are hot because
I did not know where you were going with that.
Charlotte St. Clair's Adrian in The King of Battle and Blood is like, for me, like one of the hottest, like morally gray book boyfriends in like book talk right now. And I'm just going to go ahead and assume he's not bloated and red faced.
I don't know. I may never be able to read one of these fantasy
The same.
books the same ever.
I'm going to forget that AJ said that.
Vampires for everyone forever. I'm so sorry.
It gives new meaning to like, this is the skin of a killer.
Yeah, I trust that AJ is right because she is the expert, but I'm just going to ignore that fact.
A different era.
Yeah, maybe there's been some evolution. And that's what I'm going to tell myself.
I think you guys have already touched on this, but are there any lingering questions that you all had?
My only one was about the ending when she talks about her legs, not feeling her legs anymore. And
what that means.
So we really already kind of discussed through that.
Deb, was that your question too? Lingering questions?
That was one of mine. I have more.
Tell us more.
So I'm really wondering if there were any vampire survivors, because you don't have to just be in a dwelling to stay out of the sun, right? Like you could hide under the charred remains of a house. You could hide in a cave. You could be in a heavily shaded area of the forest. I mean, Father Paul was hiding in his house in the shade, right? So I kind of don't believe that there weren't any survivors in that moment. Another question that I have was, or maybe there's two hopes that I have. I really hope that Erin was reunited with the baby. That was really heartbreaking for me, for her baby literally just to not be there. And then I really hope, spiritually speaking, that Riley was able to watch his parents persevere in that moment and not feed. That was one of my questions. Like, did he spiritually like get to see that? And I hope he did.
Yeah, that's a nice thought. I hope so too.
And you know, I do have a just one thing we've not touched on, Whitney, is just talking about Bev's constant fanaticism towards the rec center being Noah's Ark. And so I did look up Noah's Ark just a little bit, because Noah's Ark isn't just in the Bible. I mean, they call it other things in other religions, right? So according to theguardian.com, they say that Noah's Ark is a religious story that is part of Christianity and Judaism, as well as being an important story in other traditional Abrahamic religions, including Islam. And many scholars believe that the Noah's Ark flood myth may be in fact derived from the oldest Mesopotamian text known as the Sumerian flood story. So what's really interesting about this is there's a lot of similarities of the story of Noah's Ark to the Mesopotamian story. And so, I mean, there's like, 5 of them? Okay, so number one, the exact dates of the flood in both stories are only 2 days apart from each other, which I found really fascinating. Number two, where the ark actually lands is in the same place. So in the Sumerian flood story, the ark lands in Armenia, which is the same landing place of Noah's Ark, which is the mountains of Ararat. And so number three, the size and shape of the ark are also the same, where both of the stories have an ark that is more long than it is wide. Number four would be that the protagonists in the stories are always the 10th generation, which that is such a weird, specific thing, right?
Yeah.
So the flood hero in the Sumerian flood story is the 10th in the line of a long-lived antediluvian king, just as in Genesis 5, where Noah is 10th in line of the long-lived antediluvian patriarchs. So that, I mean, it's just weird that it's that specific. So I'd be interested to dig a little bit deeper into that.
Right.
And finally, both stories have the animals lining up by two and having like a promise of no more floods. So they're really, really similar. And so even though the Sumerian flood story is believed to be the oldest text with this story, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are not the only ones that follow a similar myth. This story also takes place in Hinduism, Greek mythology, and in the Cheyenne culture. And the fact of the matter is that none of us, I mean, let's just say it, have religion right. I mean, can we just say that out loud? And
I do.
I'm not sure you do. And it's interesting to see so many religious texts that follow a similar story. And we do see in all of the stories that the ark is used to purge sin and create a new world, which is just like what Father, Paul, and Bev want to see in the story. And ironically enough, water is what keeps Bev from achieving the outcome that she desires, which I loved.
Oh yeah, true.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's so much in this episode about her calling it the ark that I really wanted to see what there was to that. And it's interesting too, because the sheriff also, you know, his religious background would include an ark story as well.
Yeah, that's true. That's really interesting, Deb. Thank you for looking all that up for us.
Well, I mean, theguardian.com and actually the Torah.com is where you can find this information. So I really enjoyed reading from a different religion's point of view than just Christianity.
Yeah, I knew that there were other religions that had a flood story, but I did not realize that the flood stories were so similar.
Yeah.
That's
right.
really
so similar.
That's interesting.
Right. Yeah, which is a nerd. I'm like, does that mean it actually happened and it's just been
just been recounted several times?
Yeah, exactly.
That is one possible explanation.
Yeah, so that was one of my main questions I needed to be resolved, is like, what was the point of the ark? And you know, we've got these two different religions in the story, and how do those correlate together?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, my main question is just, what are Lisa and Warren supposed to do? You know, like, ultimately they're supposed to like row to the mainland. Okay. But then what do they do when they get there?
By the way, where do they live? Island burned to death, I hope.
Right. Like, there are a couple of high school kids and they are extremely traumatized with
Lisa's legs don't work.
Right. And she doesn't have a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Exactly. She doesn't have health insurance. She doesn't have parents. She doesn't have prior medical records from Dr. Sarah. Like, they don't have jobs. They don't have, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's really sad.
That's a real rough start.
Well, it's sad to think that they'd probably end up in the foster system.
Yeah. Unless they can somehow, you know, stay off the grid for a couple of years until they're 18.
But then they'd be homeless. Like,
exactly.
It's like is there a good outcome? I mean, I guess there could be. They could be like discovered by the wealthy family with a heart of gold.
found by AJ Vrana, a vampire expert, where they divulge all of their secrets.
They'd be like, I got a crazy story. But yeah, that's my main question lingering at the end, is just like, you know, what are they supposed to do? I hadn't even
thought about that.
And it is hopeful that, you know, not everyone on this tiny island was completely, you know, completely physically destroyed, but they're pretty emotionally and mentally destroyed, you know, and that's tough. That's a tough way to start over. So
yeah, that's not a very happy ending, that's for sure.
I know. What do you guys like most about the show? Because I love this show so much. The first time I watched it, I talked about it for weeks and weeks. And I've told everybody, like, you need to watch the show. You need to watch the show. And while we've been watching it for these episodes, I've been telling everybody again, like, please watch the show. It is so good.
I've recommended it quite a few times.
Yeah, like it's so deep. I love it so much. So I'm going to make you guys talk about what you like about it.
Whitney, I'm going to give you grief again. I know I did this last week, but I joke all the time that you love a happily ever after, and this show does not have a happily ever after. I mean, it is like the most depressing show on,
and ambiguous, and
right. I was in a slump for like 3 days after I watched it.
Aw.
But
I am
having
sorry about
said-
that.
No, it's okay. Having said that, I really like a show that doesn't have a happily ever after, but that like I'm super intrigued by. You know what I mean? And I
Yeah.
think that's what I liked so much about it, is that it does not end in a positive manner. Like there's still like no hope for these two teenage kids, like you just said. All these
Yeah.
people have died, right? All these people have made sacrifices for themselves. But you end it going like, oh my gosh, I kind of want to like watch it again. Right. I immediately want to
Yeah.
watch it again. But there
Yeah.
are a few books I want us to suggest just that have the same type of ending that I really
yeah.
liked. A couple of these I haven't read, but they were highly suggested. So the first one would be a book called The Girl with All the Gifts by Mike Carey. Mindy and I read this in a previous book club that we were.
Yeah, it was cool.
And again, I want to point out in all these books, like everyone dies at the end, which
Yeah, it's bad.
doesn't sound great, but it's just as captivating as the show is. So the second one would be I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, which if you've watched the movie, it kind of sucks, but the book's kind of good. The third one is called On the Beach, and it's by Neville Shute. The fourth one is The Children on the Hill by Jennifer McMahon. And I saw this on a Reddit thread and I just had to add it because it's so fucking funny. The Bible.
Oh.
Everyone dies at the end.
It is a pretty traumatic ending.
Oh,
It does have
man.
a pretty bad, not happily ever after, doesn't it?
Wah, wah.
Yeah.
That is funny.
Yeah. So, Mindy, what was yours?
So for me, what I love about this series, because I mean, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I'm not a religious person. I would say I'm somewhat of a spiritual person, but I definitely I don't go to church or anything. So I wouldn't call myself a heathen, but whatever. So
Bev would want you to die. That's for sure.
she would definitely.
Bev would
Me
call you a
too.
heathen.
I mean, we both have gay kids, and like
I know.
like, she would definitely want to put us on.
I would definitely be an outcast, but I also would definitely tell Bev off every chance I got. So
Yeah, I would have punched her in the cooter.
But what I loved about the way that this approached religion is that it depicted all the different ways that people worship and practice religion and how it affects them either negatively or positively, or how they promote themselves to the world negatively or positively. So, you have atheism, you have Islam, and then even within the same church, the Christian views, but there's so many different views. Like you have Annie, who's so devout, and Bev, who is so devout, quote unquote. But Annie was so much more Christ-like with her mercy and forgiveness. And so you think you've got that depiction of the devout Christian that goes way too far to the point where that they don't even look like a Christian anymore, right? And then you've got Annie, who is just this embodiment of what I think Christianity should look like, right? And then you've got Aaron, who's goes to the same church and worships and believes in the same principles, but her views are just a little bit even different than Annie's. So she's sort of like that moderate middle ground. And then you have Lisa, who she still has faith and prays for the island and her parents, even after all that shit went down. So you've got all these different nuanced ways that people follow not only different religions, but the same religion.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just so brilliant the way it's depicted, and how, this one basically event really shows everybody's humanity for one, but also
Right.
their true spirituality.
That was really deep, Mindy.
I had to do it on one of these, right?
No, I really love that because that's my favorite thing. The religious layers, I guess, of the show is why I love it so much, because my dad was a pastor. I still go to church. I'm very much in that sphere, right? And I know Bevs, and I know people that manipulate scripture and take it out of context, and that is what I love so much about this show, is that the realistic portrayal, just like you're talking about, of both the negative and the positive, but for me, more the negative. It's just so interesting to watch, and it is so thought-provoking for me, because I've long said that I think one of the big problems with the American church generally is that people don't know what the Bible actually says. So when somebody like Bev comes in and starts giving you scripture to justify horrible things that you're like, I feel like that's not right. I feel like this is wrong, but they've got these Bible verses, so I guess it's okay. Like, that is what makes this show so interesting to me. And the way that the writers, Mike Flanagan, the creator, he directed and wrote on every single episode, the way that he weaves that in to something that is so antithetical to religion in this horror genre and vampires, and the way that totally works and is seamlessly woven together is so genius to me.
Yeah.
And I've never seen anything like it. I've never read anything like it, where you take these two seemingly opposite kind of things that have both been around forever and weave them together in this really interesting way that I would never, if you tell me you want me to watch a show about church and vampires, I would be like, what are you
I would tell you no.
about? Right. Exactly. Right. Like it sounds really crazy, but the way that this is done is just so genius. And you could go on a deep dive if you want to go down a rabbit hole looking at interviews with Mike Flanagan. And his, he had a Catholic upbringing, and I'm pretty sure he settled on atheism at this point in his life. But he wrote this.
I would say so.
Right. I don't remember if he actually said that in the interviews that I was reading, though. But I think maybe he did.
I'm pretty sure this series he created speaks volumes.
I know, right? Right. But it's a huge deep dive rabbit hole in and of itself if you want to read. There's a lot of really, really interesting interviews he did a couple of years ago when this first came out on Netflix, talking about his background and the way that he understood Catholicism as a child. And he thought, Jesus was making them all vampires because they were drinking Jesus's blood and stuff. And it's really, really interesting. AJ, do you have anything that you would like to share with the class about what you like about this show?
Yes, definitely. And it's not about vampires, actually. So for some context, I was not raised religious. I was also raised in a non-North American culture. My family is from Southeastern Europe. We're from the Balkans. And although we have religion there, it's very casual. It's not really as spiritual as it is in North America, but specifically the United States. I'm also Canadian, so I live north of the border, and it's a very different culture in terms of religion. But I have a lot of American friends, and I have a lot of American friends who have religious trauma. Like I have friends who are former Baptists, who have experienced all of the bevs, basically.
Right.
And talking to them about the show is really fascinating because I've really gotten a diversity of opinions. So when I watched the show, I definitely felt like there was a bit of a cultural rift for me where I understood intellectually what was being tackled, but I just have no emotional connection to it. And so I think on some level, I couldn't fully understand emotionally what a lot of other people were experiencing. Like the way that you guys talk about the show is I can tell that your experience was dramatically different from mine. But when I talked to some of my friends who had religious trauma, like I have one friend who actually loathes this show with her whole being. And she specifically hates the ending. So I'm about to throw some fighting words, but they're not my words. So she really hated the ending because she felt that the show absolves the townsfolk of all of their bad decisions. Like it kind of pins the blame on on Bev. It absolves Father Paul, even though he kind of was the architect of this whole thing. And Bev is just a bigoted, horrible narcissist who ate up this opportunity. But she kind of felt that the show pins all the blame on Bev, absolves Father Paul, and absolves all of the townsfolk, and treats them as almost like the herd that was led astray kind of a thing. And she just felt like they didn't deserve the peace that they got at the end with the hymn.
Yeah,
I can definitely see
that's
that.
fair.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment.
Well, and I will say too, AJ, really young in my life, I was raised in a very fanatical religion myself. And I think a couple of years ago, the show probably really would have bothered me because I was so familiar with people like Bev. And I think it almost would have given me like a PTSD type of reaction.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think for me, the difference is that Father Paul repents and he realizes what he has done, and Bev continues to think that she has made the right choice.
Oh yeah.
That's what's so scary about religion as a whole, that she's like, well, I'm this is for lack of a better metaphor, this is the cross I'm going to die on.
Yes. Yeah. And I think what the show does really beautifully is that it really shows you the danger of that kind of conviction.
Right.
Like even with Father Paul, right? Like what got him into the situation he was in was his conviction.
Percent.
And Bev dies with that conviction. Like that scene at the end of her just trying to dig into the sand.
Yeah.
Like it's so pathetic.
Right. Yeah.
And so like, but she is just convicted to the very end. And to any outside observer, it's like, holy shit, girl, like reflect on your actions.
Right.
Yeah.
So it is fascinating. And I think it's a really fascinating exploration of that level of conviction. And for me, my favorite scene, but also the most horrifying scene, and it's my favorite because it's the most horrifying, is the scene in the church when they all drink the rat poison.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
Sure.
Because it's that conviction, like that belief that like, you know, it'll like, we are so certain. And, you know, when you're in that environment, like you can understand how they came to that. But like from the outside, you're just pulling your hair out. You're like, oh my God, stop.
But also they're being subjugated to extreme peer pressure and saying, well, if you're a believer, you would drink this.
Yes, exactly.
Right. And so you are supposed to be all in 100%, especially in what they're doing in terms of communion and everything. And so for them to not do it, I think a lot of people would say was like a sin. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so tricky
yes.
about the whole situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't have any conviction except for the conviction that
you're told.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because they've been groomed this whole time, right? Like in the last episode, we were talking a little bit about Father Paul's sermons, talking about, you know, God asks us to do horrifying, terrible things, but it's cool because we're God's army. And it's like, oh, hey, remember this sermon I gave? This is the horrible thing God is asking you to do, right? Like they've been primed for this awful stuff. But since none of them actually read their Bibles, they're not able to be like, hold on, I don't think this is actually accurate. And any other tidbits or thoughts you guys wanted to make sure that we talked about?
I just want to say great pick, Whitney. This is different than anything that we've done so far, and it was really fun.
I'm really excited that you guys let me choose this and that you guys really actually enjoyed it. I appreciate it. And it makes me happy that you guys like something that I like too.
Now you have to watch Buffy.
I know.
That's right.
I know.
Watch
I know.
Buffy, you heathen.
That's the true sin right there. Well, I have two nerdiest things of the week. First of all, there's a new song. You know what? Actually, I don't even know if it's a new song. It's a song that is new to me by Olivia Rodrigo, and it's called Vampire. Oh. And I saw that she had a song called Vampire, and I was like, well, I got to listen to that because we're watching Midnight Mass. And it's honestly super, super good.
Really?
It's a really, really good song. I've been listening to it a lot.
Molly loves her.
It's really good. Very catchy. I love her voice. She's really great. So I highly recommend that. And it's vampire themed. So it goes perfectly. And then my other nerdy thing is actually from today. I took some books to Half Price Books to sell them and was just like looking around, you know, while they were getting my offer ready. And I found a first edition hardcover of A Court of Mist and Fury, and it's missing the dust jacket. So it's like worth nothing, but I was really excited about it. And it was only $10.
Hard to find those in hardcover.
It really is.
And so I definitely bought it. And
people on like Mercari are selling them for like $900, which is
holy crap,
insane.
That's crazy. But yeah, I brought it home and Harvey was like, you bought a book when you went to sell your books? And I was like, it's a first edition of A Court of Mist and Fury.
Why do you think I was selling books? It's great money.
Yeah, I was like, it's a first edition hardcover. And he's like, I don't know what that means. I was like, don't worry about it. But I was really,
have
really
Robbie
excited.
Come to my house and come into that front room and see all the special editions.
Oh my gosh, It would
You know what,
really
though?
stress him out.
He would give you some grace. He'd be like,
Well, at least you don't have as many as Deb has.
It could be worse, Robbie.
she could make you display them all with their sprayed edges like Deb does.
One day I will.
That's my nerdiest thing of the year because that's been my project this year.
What is your nerdiest thing of the week, though, Deb?
Mine was really, so this will air after we get back, but and I'm sure that this could probably count as your all's too, is just prepping for the next book festival we're going to, which is less than the Low Country.
Yeah.
And so the three of us have been spending a lot of time on how we're going to be working with the authors at this event. And then also we'll be selling some bookish merch at the event as well. So I made like these little annotation kits and they're really cute. They've got a zippered book band in them, plus like the little highlight tabs and a highlighter. So the book band actually goes around your book so you can put the tabs and the highlighter in and always have it together. But I made like little stickers for them and everything. They're so cute.
Yeah, so cute.
Yeah, so it was fun. It was stressful, owning a small business and going out of town because I'm actually on vacation with my family, and then I'm meeting up with you all to finish our trek down to Charleston. And so I spent 18 hours in my studio yesterday.
Oh my goodness.
Gosh.
18 hours. My husband came home. He went to go see Rufus Wainwright, and he's like, "Have you left?" And I'm like, "I took the kids for ice cream for 15 minutes up the road, and I came right back." So I ate 3 meals in my studio yesterday.
Wow.
Yeah. But when you own a small business, you can't just leave it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you?
What about you?
I have 2 as well. And the first one might actually be more my husband's nerdiest thing of the week, because I was reading, I read probably 80% on my Kindle these days, just because it's easy and quick to get things on it. But I wanted to read, before we went to Lit, I wanted to read Kristen Granada's Heart Trick. And I had bought it, and I bought a physical copy, and I was sitting there reading it, and he comes up behind me and goes, "Are you reading an Amish book?" And I'm like, no, it's about hockey. What are you talking about? That's what he called because it wasn't on the Kindle. It was like no technology. But I thought that was so funny. I was like, yeah, I'm reading an Amish book. So that's.
But it's made of paper.
But the other one is that today I just got the new paranormal romance arc from Eva Knight, but it's actually Helena Hunting. It's her pen name for writing her new paranormal romance. So I'm really excited. I haven't gotten to dig into it yet, but it's called My Boyfriend is a Vampire.
Ooh.
You want to hear something funny? And maybe this should have been my nerdiest thing of the week. So speaking of arcs, and for our listeners, that's advanced readers copies. So these are the copies that authors send to readers so they can review and give feedback before the event or before the book comes out. So when I was typing up my notes for the Noah's Ark conversation, I kept putting ARC instead of ARK.
That's awesome.
I was like, why does that look weird?
Funny.
Well, because it's not an advanced reader's copy. It's a book.
Wrong arc. I bet advanced reader copies are more fun than a big boat of animals, though,
I would say they smell.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that.
At least they don't smell like poop. AJ, do you have a nerdiest thing of the week?
I do. So I actually bought my partner back in March for his birthday. I pre-ordered a collector's edition of Baldur's Gate 3. I don't know if any of you know what that is.
I've heard of it.
Oh my gosh, I've got to play this game, AJ.
Okay. So I managed to snatch up one of the collector's editions, and it was just delivered on Friday. But I had to fight UPS for it.
Oh no.
So they finally released it, and it got delivered, and my partner was just the happiest little nerd in the world. So he was just holding this giant box, it was Christmas, and I took a picture of him with it, and then he just I sat with him while he unboxed it, and he looked so happy, and I was like, oh, so it was, I guess it was more his nerdy moment, but
So can I ask what the difference is? What comes with the collector's edition?
Oh my gosh. So there's an art book that comes with it, and there's all these little knickknacks like stickers and a map that you can frame. There's also a figurine. Figurine feels like it's not grand enough of a word, but a figure, like a toy figure. So yeah, there's just a lot of nerdy fan stuff.
Can I date you? That sounds great.
That's like the a book box for gamers.
Yeah. That's what it is. Yeah.
That's amazing. What a great gift and how thoughtful.
Oh, yeah, he was like really excited for it. So I was like, I'm gonna get one of these. It was like $300, but I was like, screw it. And I feel really lucky though, because now there's like scalpers who are selling them for like $25K on
Holy
Oh
crap.
my gosh.
Yeah. Wild.
That's crazy.
And who has 25K?
I was
No,
just thinking that
seriously.
exact same
Like-
thing. Like, that's crazy. Well, I mean, I guess good luck. Good luck on that. Well, that's all for this episode.
This actually is the end of that.
This actually is the
the
end.
true ending.
AJ, thank you so much for coming on and being with us and talking about the show and about vampires. You really taught us a lot.
I
think.
know.
Thank you for having me. It was super fun.
Yeah.
And we'll see you at Imaginarium next year, right?
Yes, I will be there.
Awesome.
Great.
We'll have to pick some more vampire themed books so that we can keep having you on
I know.
to teach us more. Thank you so much. It was really, really fun. This finishes our Midnight Mass series. We're going to have an author interview. And then the first Tuesday in December, we're going to start our discussion of Tessa Bailey's Wreck the Halls with chapters 1 through 16. See you then.
Bye. Can't wait. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Like what you heard in this episode? Follow Our Nerdiest Thing on Instagram at instagram.com/Our Nerdiest Thing or Facebook at facebook.com/Our Nerdiest Thing. We love hearing from fellow nerds. Email us at ournerdiestthing@gmail.com.